Hello, Sally. How are you today?
I'm good, Serena. Yeah, really nice to see you. I'm so excited about this conversation about self-care. Um, I'm a bit of a self-care junkie, actually. I love self-care.
That's a great way to start this podcast. Yeah, we've decided to look at self-care today because, again, I think it's one of those things that people might not associate with behaviour change on face value.
Yeah.
But for me, it's an incredibly important component when you're thinking about undertaking any type of change at all.
Yes.
But please tell me what a self-care junkie is, because this we have to define. Let's hear what
Yeah.
this is for you.
We've got to unpick this, haven't we? Well, I just can't function properly if I am not looking after myself properly. And don't get me wrong, I'm a self-care junkie now because I have really burnt out in the past, especially with menopause. Like going through the whole menopause transition has really made me up my self-care game. So in my 20s and 30s, I could just sort of live a bit of a reckless life, drink a lot, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and all of that, and put myself in really sticky wicket situations, and then bounce back and recover and just get on with it. And it was sort of like a bit of a hedonistic life, really. But then perimenopause, menopause starts weaning its way in, and you just can't behave in the same way as you used to. So
Mm.
I've really, really, really had to like slow down on a lot of areas of my life, take lots more rests, have a lot more structure in my day. Like I've just started meditating again, which is super helpful for sleep and like fractured attention. Um, and also there's self-care, which you don't think of as self-care, like setting boundaries and
Mm.
redefining what your values are. To me, that is quite a high self-care, a high aspect of self-care that I think we overlook. We tend to think of self-care as being bubble baths and massages and, things like that. But I think self-care is so much deeper than just those external
Mm.
things. I think the way that we talk to ourselves is self-care or not. We can talk to ourselves in a harmful way, or we can talk to ourselves in a soothing way. Like if we're using soothing tones, that's self-care. And also I think the misconception is that self-care costs money,
Ah,
but
interesting.
there are many ways that you can care for yourself that don't cost money, just like slowing down, breathing deeper, going to bed earlier.
Mm.
It doesn't have to be a really expensive massage or a five-star hotel, as we've established in the last episode.
Did we did cover a lot on your love of five-star resorts, Sally, which was
so,
great.
so what does self-care mean to you, Serena?
It's one of those situations where I'm just going to say what she said.
Yeah,
Again. So a lot of what you said I really relate to. Um, and I love what you said about self-care not just being maybe that surface level stuff that people tend to think of, like, a bath or going to a spa day or something like that. That self-care is actually more about uh, what we value in ourselves. Like you talked a lot, and I think I want to do a whole episode in the future on boundaries, actually, because this is a really, really big part of this
yeah,
conversation as well, is having boundaries in our lives in regards to, what we say yes to, where we put our time, where we spend our energy. Energy is a big part of self-care for me,
oh
because I
yeah,
have to really take care of my energy. And I'm sure we'll talk about that and why. Um, because self-care for me is about recharging and replenishing and doing what you need to do as an individual that allows you to fill your cup in such a way that it allows you to be who you want to be in the world. And that
yeah,
can be anything that you're here to do. Like, for example, in order to be able to do your job well, in order to be able to be a great parent, in order to be a good partner, in order to not feel like you're losing your mind and you have self-worth and self-esteem, what is it that you need to do to take care of yourself?
Yeah.
And that can look like some really big things,
Yeah.
which will include big behavioral change shifts in themselves to take care of yourself, like having boundaries. Or it can be really small things like, a bath, or having half an hour on your own with that cup of coffee in the morning before anyone wakes up. So it can be there's really small little things that don't cost a lot, but they make the biggest difference to you filling your cup first, so you can go and do the things that you want to do.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. For me, it comes back to this physics principle of like input output. If you
Right.
don't fill your car up with petrol, it's not
mm,
going to run.
mm,
There has to be a way of recharging your batteries. You you plug your phone in overnight so that it charges up, so that it's got charge in the system to do
yeah.
all of the things that it needs to do for you. And we are, if you think of yourself as a battery, we are like a battery. We do have an energetic charge running through us. We are made of electrons and neutrons and all of those electrical particles. So when we care for ourselves, we are essentially recharging our battery so that we then have output. And if we don't have enough charge in the system, what happens? We get ratty. These are the first signs of our charge not being enough: irritability,
mm,
lack of perspective, overwhelm, reacting to things that don't necessarily, aren't as, don't need that heightened
mm.
reaction, for example. And then, of course, those things can then lead to burnout, and that's when the battery goes flat and the body takes over.
Yeah, and I love that you said that, because what I'm hearing, so again, the reason that we're covering this is it's a funny one with self care when you're looking at behavior change, because I would say that when you're undertaking any form of change, that we have to think about how we take care of ourselves as we're making that change. So self care becomes implicit in any change that we're making. And yet, what I find is that is often, as I said at the start of the podcast, it's not something that people consider, because self-care, I think, so when I'm working with a client, for example, or have in the past, it's often a real push to get someone to consider self-care as being something that's important in their change. It's like it's just not even on their list that actually they're going to need to take care of themselves as they undertake the work. And so what is interesting is what becomes a lot of the focus of my work often is the challenge that people have around taking care of themselves.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I experience that a lot in my practice as well, in
Mm,
that growth for some people is not doing the 5K. Growth is learning to rest in between the 5K runs.
mhm.
So it's like a switch in thinking. It's a different type of perspective. um, Rest being part of the work, or how we're weaving in a certain amount of rest
Yeah,
so that we can facilitate the things that we actually want to change.
yeah,
I
and it's
really
interesting.
struggle. Go on.
Go on. No, you go. You said, "Oh, you
it's
really struggle."
something it's something that I've noticed as I've been doing couch to 5K, and as I've been trying to improve my PBs in the gym, noticing that I actually need a lot more rest
Mm,
than I thought I did. Like, one day is not enough for me. If I'm doing a big workout this afternoon, I will need 2, maybe 3 days of rest to actually
right.
get rid of those DOMs. And there might be something underneath the surface. There might be a deficiency of some kind that I need to look into. But I'm taking all my collagen and protein and all of that. But I listened to a podcast with a fascia specialist who was basically saying we don't realize, especially as we get older, we do need a lot more rest for the body to knit itself back together again. You've got
Mm,
to give yourself more time when you're thinking about a kind of workout protocol to get stronger in
mm,
one way,
mm.
in one aspect, we need to kind of pull back as well. So it's like, how do we negotiate this dance between pushing and not pushing? That's something that
That's
I find
exactly,
curious.
I love that you said that, because it's exactly what I was going to say. Because self-care can look like adding more into your schedule, because self-care can be to exercise, which is adding something in.
Yeah.
And I find that most people find self-care that involves adding something easier than when I'm saying take something away. So it's easier to say, okay, let's think about how you can add these things into your diet. Let's look at how we can incorporate more exercise into your diet. Let's see how we can incorporate meditation into your week. So someone who's a doer will go, brilliant, tick, I can do that. That's self-care. Tick, 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 tick. But it's when you're saying, actually, pull back and do less. It's not adding something, it's taking things away. Let's look at self-care looking like creating space.
Yes.
Let's have self-care look like stopping and not doing anything tonight. Like there's nothing on your agenda. Then people start to get itchy. And
Yeah.
it's that kind of self-care that I think I'm particularly interested in. Um, because I think it's the self care, especially with a lot of the women that I've worked with. So high functioning, educated women with a passion and a purpose. They
Yeah.
are the ones that find it the most challenging to pull back and to not add to
Yeah.
their schedule, because it's far more challenging to actually create space, and essentially self care looking like not doing anything.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because I think it goes against a lot of the social narrative,
Mm.
the cultural narrative, the familial narrative, our family narrative of
Yeah.
you've got to be more, do more, have more, especially
Yeah.
the feminist narrative as well, that women can have it all. We don't have to just be in the home. We don't have to just be um, slaves to the domestic life. We can go out and work. Well, we have to really now. There's not much choice because
Mm.
everything is so expensive now. But we're constantly in this battle with what society's telling us, with what our
Mm.
families are telling us, and with what we actually have to do, because
Yeah.
two income families are pretty much a necessity these days.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of challenge. There really, really is. But I listened to a podcast the other day. The guy, it was Stephen Bartlett. I can't remember the name of the person speaking, but he was amazing, and he was basically saying that like our attention spans are so degraded at the moment with social media and just living in the information age. There's so much choice. That every time we resist an urge to do a productive thing or to get up and do something, we're strengthening a prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that is involved in rational decision making and and things like that. So actually, when like for me, when I'm doing intermittent fasting and I am resisting eating, because I know my body is benefiting from it in some way, shape, or form, I find that hugely motivating and such
Mm.
an unlock, as you say, capturing one of your words, a real unlock to help me lean into that a bit more. So this is why I'm now doing meditation, because I want to practice feeling distracted, but not distracting myself, knowing, like feeling into that pain of, oh, I really want to get up, or, oh, I really want to look at my phone, knowing that because I'm leaning into that feeling, I am benefiting, I am improving. My prefrontal cortex is getting
Mm.
better, is getting stronger. So in the
Mm.
discomfort, we grow. Coming back to that narrative, in that discomfort, we change, we grow.
I agree. I think also what I'm hearing when you're speaking, and it certainly is reminiscent of so many conversations I've had with previous clients, is just so much of our self-worth is tied up with what we do and what we produce.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you're talking about slowing things down and not engaging with things, and like I said, I think that's the thing that people find the most challenging, and yet also intuitively knowing that when they do that, that they are taking care of themselves. So that,
Yeah.
linking back to that kind of self-care, we know intuitively what self-care looks like for us, and it's very individual to
Yeah.
everyone. You talk to someone and you ask them what that looks like, and it's never usually one thing. It's a combination of lots of things that can feel like you're taking care of yourself, from those little micro moments every day of just maybe taking 10 minutes to have a coffee. Or for me, for example, a self-care day looks like having nothing scheduled in my diary and not having to interact with anyone
Yeah.
and not having to be anywhere, and kind of just having a day where I potter around with no schedule. I might just go and I will always do a lovely dog walk and be in nature. So there's loads of little boxes that I'm kind of ticking for myself that create the sense that I'm taking care of myself. And yet what you're battling when you're doing that often, and I know this feeling, is you're battling the sense of guilt because you are not producing anything, because you're
Yeah.
not doing something. And I think this goes back to the underlying psychology around, we feel that our sense of self-worth is tied up with what we produce.
Mm.
um, and what we forget is, although again we know it intuitively, because if you question anyone about this, they typically can tell you that it's not right that they're not taking care of themselves. But everyone knows that you can't fill from an empty cup.
Yeah.
So self-care, we know intuitively, is incredibly important, and yet intuitively we find it very, very hard to do for ourselves because we have been hardwired over time, for all the reasons that you said as well, around the roles that we have, what people expect of us. Maybe if you are, for example, you've got kids, people are constantly expecting things of you, and so we have a tendency to fulfill those roles because we feel unconsciously like we have to constantly be producing something or being something for someone else.
Yeah, it comes back to that identity piece, doesn't it? So
Mm.
if you are a busy mum, is there part of you that identifies with being a busy mum? Like if that is woven into your identity,
Mhm.
that might be tricky for you to shift that if you're deriving your sense of self-worth and your sense of identity of being, it might not be a busy mum, it might be a high-flying lawyer in New York City. If that's the only thing you've ever known yourself as,
Yeah.
and you stop doing that, that's going to be
Hmm.
a threat to your psyche,
Yeah.
your sense of stability. So
Yeah.
of course, sitting there doing nothing, staring out of a window for a whole day, or not having anything in the diary might start to really upset the apple cart. But if we can notice it, if we can go, oh, that's just the psyche, or oh, that's just the nervous system, whatever paradigm you're into, I think we can sort of reconcile with it a little bit more and perhaps use it as an opportunity to do some journaling on it when it comes up, how we can maybe talk to that part of ourselves that feels a little bit uneasy, because we all
Mm.
have these different aspects and these different parts of ourselves that we can talk to.
Definitely. And I think the key thing there, so certainly, again, when I teach this, we look a lot at identity and how it links to what you've said. And I think this does go back to what I said before about that sense of self-worth. When it comes to that kind of identity,
Yeah.
you have the identity of, oh, I don't know, martyr, I do things for everyone else. If you peel the layers of that back, what's really underneath that? So this is going back to some of the other work that I've looked at before, what's the payoff from doing that?
Yeah. What are you gaining
Then
from it?
what are you gaining from doing it? Because there is something that you're gaining, but also, like, at the same time, what's the cost of doing that? There is a cost associated with that.
Yeah.
And some of the changes that you might need to make as a result of not fulfilling that will go back to what we said right back at the start, which is to have boundaries around the things that you actually really know to be really important for yourself, and actually kind of holding on to those boundaries. So if I just say that in a really simple way, for example, you know that you need half an hour in the morning to yourself and that coffee, because it really sets you up for the day. And you know that if you've got children or a husband, that they may ask things of you and it might eat into that time. And because you want to fulfill the role in the identity of wife or mother, that you might then actually let those people make requests of you and then you fulfill them. But then what you've done is you've not done the thing that you know will serve you first. Whereas
Yeah.
if you had a strict boundary around that and you protected it, that is actually going to serve you in the future and actually fill up your self-care cup
Yeah.
first. You know that actually that's something that you need to do for the long term
Right.
to be a good mother, to be a good wife.
Right. So it,
Good being, just a hypothetical
yeah.
situation, a word that I'm using there.
Yeah, exactly. So in a way, setting the boundary actually gives you more of what you want in the long run. It gives you more of that identity. It enables that identity to live on in a way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm,
So it's not what we're saying ultimately is this is behavior change. This isn't easy. You know intuitively what actually is right for you and what will serve you. So we all know, I think, if you're open to having that conversation and you can sit with it, you can tap into what you actually need to be able to take care of yourself on both a micro scale and a macro scale.
mm,
And actually, by taking care of yourself and actually honoring that first, you are going to be able to show up in the world in the manner that you want to show up and be the best version of that, whether that's in your work, in the roles that you have around your relationships, like partner, like mother, like sister, like friend, like daughter. And actually, when you don't take care of yourself first, you are kind of kowtowing to the external roles that everyone else wants you to slip into. And that's when you start to feel quite resentful, I think. And actually, it's when you start to deplete your own cup.
yeah,
And
and
actually,
for
if you're slipping into that, what you're doing is you're tying your self-worth into those roles.
mm,
And
mm,
I'm saying
and
that's not a good place to be, because you are worthy in and of yourself. And so your self-worth should not be tied to what you are able to do for others.
yeah, yeah, I really, really resonate with what you're saying. And
Mm.
when I feel like I am doing or playing to the gallery, shall we say, rather than playing to myself,
That.
I really feel it. Like, I don't know how tuned in you are, Serena. I'm guessing you're really tuned in like me. And people who are listening might have varying levels of self attunement. But when
Mm,
you start doing this work and you really do tune into yourself, even the slightest little thing that enters your life where you then start behaving in a way that is, playing to the gallery, as I said before, it the feeling of just things being off, it's like something's off. I don't know what it is, but something's
mm,
off. I feel
mm,
it like so quickly these days. And
mm,
it will get to a point where it usually, like, I can't quite grasp what it is. And
mm,
then something will happen and I'll crash. It will get like, I will have a meltdown, or I'll have to like cut someone out of my life, or it will just be a blazing
mm.
argument with someone and I'll feel awful. And then it will hit the body. I'll be getting palpitations and migraines, and then it'll be, right, I've got to stop this now. So you
Yeah.
have this stop, you have this reset, you do your journaling, and always, always, always it comes back to, I was playing to the gallery. I wasn't listening to my own intuition. I knew this
Mm,
collaboration wasn't right. I knew this holiday wasn't going to be great for me. I knew I shouldn't have gone to, I don't know, this restaurant. I should have gone to that restaurant. You could always be able to trace it back to some kind of intuitive sense that you had about something
mm.
that you betrayed. And I think
Yes.
that is such a powerful realization, and to me that's life. Like, that is the whole meaning of life, like to constantly play out this stuff, and but having that as an invitation to constantly come back to ourselves.
It's so interesting to me that even so, as you're speaking, I love that phrase of kind of playing to the gallery, because it really makes sense of what we're talking about here in terms of when you're actually more worried about essentially what other people think of you than
Yeah,
doing what you know will first serve yourself. Like,
yeah,
just the fear of what that might appear to be to others as well if you do that. Like, will you appear to be selfish?
yeah,
Will you appear to be self-serving? Will you appear to be someone who doesn't care about community, that you don't want to help? And it's interesting how much of this is, and again, people listening, I really encourage you to think about this for yourself if you're listening to this, how much of what you do relates to what you do in terms of what you think other people will think of you.
yeah, yeah.
And what would you do if you had no one else to please? And I don't necessarily mean that you want to obviously rid your life of, family and friends and everything. But if you were able to kind of pare everything back and look at what you would need to do for yourself to be the best version of yourself, and to be a better version of you, or a more healthy, honest, authentic version of you in all of those relationships that you have, what would that look like? And that starts with taking care of you and
Yeah,
not worrying about what other people think. Again, this goes back to, we've talked about boundaries before, and we definitely need to pick this up in an episode on its own.
yeah,
But boundaries are incredibly important, and so much of this does come back to your relationships with people,
yeah,
doesn't it?
yeah. It
Um,
really does. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think there is a balance to be had. This, and I often battle with sort of expectations of
Mm,
others and what will people think and all of that, because that was a bit of a narrative. In my maternal history, there was a lot of self denial for spiritual gain, if you like. So
mm,
that's
mhm.
it's like getting, the more you deny yourself, the closer to God you will be. It's
Martha.
yeah, martyr energy. Yeah, you're right. So
Mm,
self-sacrifice,
yeah,
self-betrayal, a lot of that
yeah, yeah.
in the maternal lineage. So yes, I do battle with that, and also this idea of, if I'm doing something for myself, am I
Mm,
going to be perceived as selfish? So,
mm,
for example, we were on holiday with a group of people who, there's me and my husband, my mum and dad, and their friends, my parents' friends. Now, I go to bed early and I like to have a long wind down period. So I
yeah,
like to be asleep by about 10, half 10, but I also
mhm,
like to wind down from about 8 o'clock.
yeah.
Sometimes I'll push it, so like 9 o'clock. Sometimes I'll push it to half 9. But generally speaking, it's around that sort of time. So that means going into my cave, putting on my programs, just being with husband, just laying there watching whatever. So that means we're at the dinner table. I'm starting to feel a bit tired. I don't want to push myself and have conversations with people who actually aren't my friends. They're my mum and dad's friends, just for the sake of being polite. This
Yeah,
is my holiday. I want to have a nice time and I
love
want to
it.
wake up feeling refreshed. So I excuse myself early from the dinner table, taking that risk. What are
Mm,
these people who don't know me going to think about me by going, "Good night, everyone. I'm off now." And this is not the first time I do this on retreats. And people are like, "You going to bed now? Like, it's 8:30. Like, come on, join the party." I will not compromise
love it.
on this. It's like I can't.
Yeah,
It's like a
non-negotiable.
clock in my head that goes,
Mm,
right, okay, ding, ding, ding. It's time for you to go now, love. You've got to
mm,
preserve yourself.
love it.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
guess what I'm saying is it's possible, but it's not always comfortable. And I do feel uncomfortable sometimes when I do it, but it's needs must.
And it's also, there's what I'm hearing there as well is we're hard. Yeah, you're hardwired to have um like an intuition around how that might be perceived by other people. And so many
Yes.
so many people would buy into that narrative and not do what actually is self-serving.
Right.
But actually, I think, again, we all know intuitively the only person that you end up hurting is yourself in those situations.
Yeah.
You know, to walk through life constantly doing what makes other people happy is a
And what's
life,
socially acceptable.
unlived. It's a life unlived. It's a life that people usually get to the end of their life and they think, what the bleep did I do that for?
Mm.
Why didn't I just go to bed early if I wanted to? Why didn't I
Yeah.
have that half an hour in the morning? Why didn't I enjoy more days where I potted around and did nothing? I didn't produce anything.
Yeah. And just
Um,
enjoyed my existence for the sake of it.
yeah, yeah. There's a beautiful and I don't know it, and I want to find it so I don't do it any disservice. But there's a beautiful saying taken from Indigenous Americans, um, and it's about someone's purpose in life is to be.
Right. I
It's just
love that.
that we are all seeking this big thing when actually we're already doing what it is we are here to do, which is to be.
To be. Yeah.
Just to be and experience life, and that is enough. And I think
Yeah.
again that's a key word for me. I did a video on this many years ago about the psychology or how to stop feeling guilty, and actually this comes into this conversation for me around self-care, because I know that there's a lot of guilt around people taking care of themselves, and for me often it links back to, as I said, self-worth before, but going back to that sense that you are just enough as you
Yeah.
are enough,
Yeah.
and being
Absolutely.
comfortable with just being enough in the moment,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's your only job, like, it's just to be you. So actually, if other people have an issue with who you're being, that is their issue. Their issue is nothing to do with you. It's something that they have to work on. If someone has a problem with you taking care of yourself, it's triggering something in them.
Yeah.
So that therefore
Absolutely.
it's their work, not yours.
Yeah. And exactly that. And that is what enables me to have
Mm,
hardcore confidence in knowing that, yeah, I can do that. I can excuse myself, politely excuse myself, and do what I need to do for me without. But yeah, it's uncomfortable, but my resolve is strong because I know that if they
mm,
don't like it, it says so much more about them than it does of me. And I just want to hark back to what you said about, the Indigenous American expression about the only meaning of life is to exist.
mm,
And that's exactly what I put in my hypnosis recordings for people that are coming with this inability to, they're addicted to productivity, or they don't have a particularly good sense of themselves, is that life wanted you here.
mm,
Something gave you life, and that something wanted you here. Your
mm,
existence to that thing that gave you life is important, and there's
mm,
nothing you need to do to prove your worth to anyone. Yes, we
mm,
need to make money. Yes, we need to sustain ourselves. But ultimately, whether you do that or don't do that, the
mm,
fact that you are here,
mm,
resonating, and you have a body, you have a mind, you're a thinking, cognitive being, that in itself is your worthiness. Your existence means you are worthy. There's nothing else you have to do to prove that. But unfortunately, that's not what we see, is it?
No, and I think it goes back to some of what you said. I mean, look at the world that we live in. Look at what we're all doing. It's in some ways what we're speaking about might seem like some kind of utopia. Like we're just here, man.
Yeah,
But at the same time, we're here, man, and we also have to function, as you've alluded to, in normal life, and we, possibly have to work really hard to put a roof over our heads, and we have to engage in life.
yeah,
And so I guess away from that utopia where we can't just sit on a rock and be. And for many of us, we wouldn't want to do that. We like the lives that we have, and we like what we've created, and we like our 5-star resorts and holidays. We want nice things, and so
yeah,
I guess the question is, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit now. is what can we do to create and have space for self-care in our life in this busy world that we do live in, because like you and me, we both work for ourselves. That's not easy. um I have to work hard to create a sense of taking care of myself.
Yeah.
And probably like a lot of people listening, it's, if you're not careful, it's something that you realize very quickly that you've not been doing. And often that manifests for a lot of people as illness because they've not been taking care of themselves. They're suddenly on that hamster wheel and they realize that they're going, and they haven't stopped.
Yeah.
So what do you do, Sally? You've alluded to your sleep routine. What do you do to take care of yourself?
Oh, so, so much.
You said you're a
Um,
junkie. You said you're a
yeah.
self junkie. So can you tell us? Because I think it's helpful for us to share some of the things that we might do, and I'd
Yeah,
love
for
for people
sure.
to think about making sense of what they do.
Well, I mean, fundamentals. Water. I have a 2 litre bottle of water that I carry around with me, and I decant it into a glass and I make sure I'm hydrated enough. Speaking from experience, I've had, I've passed out when I've been dehydrated. My dad recently passed out when he was dehydrated. It's very, very foundational stuff. And, if we want to improve our mental capacity, just drinking
Yeah.
a glass of water will instantly clear some brain fog. So it's really
Mm,
important. It's really important for our muscles, our bones, our blood flow, our circulation, our heart rate, everything. And sometimes I'll put some electrolytes in my water as well, because I know that we are electrical beings and it improves our electrical conductivity when we drink electrolytes. So that's really important. One of the things I do, I'm into like electric universe theory and all of that. I also take salt baths. I'm really into the power of
mm,
salt. So if I've been doing a lot of clients, seeing a lot of clients, or had a lot of output, I'll feel like other people's energy is in my energy field, or there's static, there's noise in the signal. So when I take a salt bath, and I think there's some science around this, so salt creates like a plasma, and it's conductive, so it sort of draws out. It's very drawing. It will draw out energies and stuff from other people out into the water. So it's got a very like grounding, drawing, like bringing you back to you sort of
mm,
effect. So I will make sure I have that if I'm doing a lot of clients, but also like just going in the sea as
mm,
well, like going into any kind of salt water. When you come out of any sort of salty water, you have this like spring in your step, you have this aliveness, you feel like you've been put back together again. And it's because of the nature, the conductive nature of salty water. I've been doing intermittent fasting, which again feels like, what I love about intermittent fasting is it's editing, it's not
mm,
adding. So for me, when I add, it feels like things are getting more complex. But when I
mm,
strip away, it's like a relief. I don't have to do as much shopping. I don't have to remember to eat. I can just have like a protein shake instead, and that's that done. You know what I'm like with cleaning my kitchen and stuff, like don't get to it very often. Um, so yeah, that appeals to my sense of efficiency. Um, but having said that, I've been having these protein sort of meal replacements for about 3 months, and they are quite high in histamine, which has given me mouth ulcers. So again,
mm,
I do think every front has a back. So it might look like a panacea from the outside, but actually it will have a payoff and a consequence, which you'll then have to modulate as you go
mm,
through your life. So yeah, those are some of the sort of external things. And then of course the internal ways of speaking to yourself, I think, are so
mm,
important, because I think our thought processes can be really highly destructive if we're not careful. We can really beat ourselves up and end up with all kinds of like internal problems when we don't speak to ourselves in the right way. So I
mm,
work on that. That's a work in progress, and that is better when I'm meditating and when I'm sleeping better as well. So,
Mm.
yeah. What about you? I'd love to hear some of your self-care pursuits.
Well, I won't go into the minutiae. I relate to a lot of what you've said. So, obviously I exercise and I eat well and all of those things that are a form of self-care. I think the
Yeah.
biggest one, the other one actually that I will talk about maybe another time, is I've become really boundaried with who I spend my time with. That's an act of self-care, massively. So I'm very particular about who I spend my time with and when.
Are there
And
certain qualities of people that you can't be around?
yeah, definitely.
Go on,
That's a whole other
spill the beans.
episode. uh, and energy suckers.
Yeah.
So I've over the years I've slowly, I don't want to say got rid of, culled sounds harsh.
So hang
But
on,
yeah,
before you say that, what is an energy sucker?
so an energy sucker is, so it's those relationships where when I've been around someone, I walk away from them and I feel depleted, not energized. Literally that. I walk
Okay.
away and it's like, Christ alive, like what on earth was that about? That was just, like I've seen this person now, I've known this person for years, and I'd be really surprised if they knew anything about me.
Oh, I see. So
I know
like,
everything about them, everything.
yeah.
But they know nothing about me. I challenge them to be able to answer one question about me other than what my name is.
So
Um,
people who talk at you, like I call them radio transmitters.
yeah. But also that manifests in all kinds of ways in a relationship, doesn't it? Because it's usually they're not just doing that. Usually you're putting more effort into the relationship as well. So those kind of friends where I've had in the past where not only is everything about them in every conversation, but everything is for them.
Okay.
So, like maybe you're doing things and you're always the one organizing it.
Yeah.
You're always the one paying for lunch. You're always the one. It's just like everything. There's nothing. It turns into, for me, what I've noticed. This is going a bit off topic, and I think we'll talk about this another time. But I noticed that what's happened in that relationship is we've stepped into a parent-child dynamic,
Yeah, very
and so
much
I
so.
realize I'm fulfilling something for them in a parental way. It's no longer a friendship. Whereas I've got other friends where uh, it feels, basically it's so much more equal, and so
Yeah.
I walk away feeling energized and connected and can't wait to see them again, and I feel like my cup is full. Like I come away energized and I've got more energy than when I went into that interaction.
Yeah. So
And
Eileen
yeah.
McCusick says, are you an electron donor or are you an electron stealer?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And then,
I mean, all relationships go through periods where, depending on what that other person's going through, you naturally have times when you do need to give that friend more energy. But again, that's normal in a relationship, and you expect those periods. But when it's all one way or all the other, yeah. So those people, and some of those people, let's just be mindful, can be family,
yeah.
and that's harder to disentangle from.
I mean,
So
yeah, it's
yeah, that's
huge.
a whole other thing, and actually that could come into behaviour change as well if we're brave enough to tackle it. But
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, for me over the years, part of my self-care is to spend less time with those people, and in actual fact, for the most part, filter those people out over time, because
Yeah.
as you do, I think as you get older, you certainly get to an age, and I have, where that I don't want people like that in my life. Like, I wish them well. You go and have a lovely life and find your tribe,
Yeah.
but I'm not getting anything from this interaction. Like, there's
Yeah.
nothing in it for me. It's just I'm serving you, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
friendships are about connection for me. There's no true connection in a relationship like that.
That's
So yeah,
true.
so for me, self-care is definitely not encountering that and being in those relationships and staying in them.
Yeah. And
100%.
for you, what I've learned about you, Serena, is you value play as well.
Oh,
And because of play, then
mm.
I know you can play with yourself, but not in that way.
Yeah, different show, folks.
But in order to
When
play,
you say that, it makes me think of the Eddie Murphy scene. I don't know if anyone can remember this. Is it? Nutty Professor,
Go on.
and in it, there's a character that says, "Sometimes when I'm alone, I relate to myself." I always think of that scene. Sorry, that's a slight tangent. We'll have to cut that out. Keep going. Let's go as if
No,
I go.
keep that in. I love it.
How you play?
I know you can play with yourself, but actually play is better, let's say, when it's with others. So
Yeah.
because you have a high play value, I
Yes.
now understand why those boundaries are also quite high for you as well,
Mm.
because you want to play with nice people.
And it's funny that you say that, because when I look at the attraction I have to people, and I mean friends of any attraction, so not romantic attraction, but attraction to a person, play is high, 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 high up on that. So when someone's playful and they've done something playful, my heart soars. And like some of those friends, some of the things they've done that they probably think was so nothing have stayed in my mind forever and ever, because I'm like, yes, we are bonded over those things. So yeah, you're right. It's yeah, it's incredibly important. And I don't want all of my friends to think that they have to fulfill that in me and in
Yeah.
our relationship. But yeah, you're right. It will usually feature somewhere.
Yeah.
Like, I want to do fun things with people. I'm definitely, if I've got friends, I always organise things that are kooky and they can join in if they want to, and it's
Yeah.
fun.
I
Yeah.
love that. It's so important and so powerful for self-care as well, because it's nourishing, when you're around people like that and there's play and there's energy being generated, you're going to get that energy for yourself. Coming back to what I said at the beginning, it is, from a physics point of view, self-care is about balancing this input versus output. And
Mm,
it comes into every single area of our lives, how we show up in our work, how we show up in our friendships, with our
mm,
family, with what we eat, with how we exercise, with our routines. All of it has got an energy input output consequence. So I think
yeah.
it's like really being mindful of that, and how that then feeds into our ability to make changes. When we
Mm,
have energy, we're going to have more
yeah.
energy to then build on that, aren't we? And continue to make changes. So it's like the better it gets, the better it gets.
Well, just linking to that energy, because I have gone off topic, because I said I'm just going to whiz through these quick ones and go back to the main thing I've done, and that's not it. The main thing, if I could just say what it is, because I think it is really important. I don't know whether other people will get something from this, and you've alluded to something similar, is I love interactions that feed this energies that we're speaking of, but I am also a very deeply internal person. So I am oh God, what's the word I'm looking for? Definitely cut this out, Sally. I'm an introvert.
Okay.
Simple word that I couldn't remember. So I always talk about with my clients when I was working with them on one-on-one, I always think that figuring out whether you're more hardwired for introversion or extroversion is a real unlock.
Mm,
And I think people misconstrue what that can look like often. I think we're becoming better at seeing that people can manifest it differently on the outside, but it doesn't necessarily mean it makes sense of what someone's like inside. Because
mm,
I'm a massive, massive introvert. Now, you see all the things I do, I'm always presenting and I'm teaching and I did improv and I'm singing. It might look like I'm an extrovert, but I'm
mm,
deeply, deeply introverted. And so I can do all those things because I get to go back to my introvert tendencies. So the way I always describe it is, where do you get your energy from?
yeah.
So some people, that extroverts, I think typically are hardwired to get their energy from being in and around other people.
Yeah.
And they feel quite concerned when they don't see lots of things in their diary where they can get that hit of being around others.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm the opposite. If I look at my diary and I'm constantly around other people, I'm shaking in my boots because I'm like, I don't know if I can function.
Yeah.
So what I've learned to do, being this massive introvert, because I get my energy from being alone and
Yeah.
recharging on my own and breathing, is my biggest form of self-care is factoring in that time on my own as much as possible. And that
Yeah.
is the biggest game changer I've had to embrace that. And just to share something personal, which is something I don't talk about anywhere, is over 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue. And it's a really, really awful thing to have. And it's been really debilitating for me. And so actually being forced to think about how I manage my time has been, I've had to do it. And
Yeah.
so now what that looks like for me in practical terms is I do, if I have a block where I'm working a lot, I have to have a day to myself the day after. Or if I'm doing something all day, I have to have an evening where I don't have something planned as well.
Yeah.
So factoring in, basically, the short version is factoring lots of downtime to counterbalance the time where I'm constantly connecting, because I can't do it.
Yeah. And were you worried about doing that at first? Did you think you might lose out?
Yeah. And actually, and what it wasn't that I was worried about losing out, but again, we're probably going to go too deeply into this at this point in the podcast. But again, for you listening at home or in the car, wherever you are, if you're similar and you relate to what I'm saying, figuring out where it comes from, it can be a game changer. Because for me, it came from my upbringing, obviously.
Most
um,
things do,
I,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. So brought up in a household where both my parents were self-employed. They were constantly on the go. My mum was the kind of mum, God love her, who was batting on the door early in the morning if we were sleeping in. Like, what are you doing up? You're lazy.
Oh, yeah.
That whole narrative around being still means being lazy,
Right.
um, is what I was brought up thinking and feeling. And so I naturally feel that massive amount of guilt if I'm not doing something. And so
Mm.
for years I was battling this horrible feeling of, if I'm still, if I'm not doing anything, and this goes back to what I said before about it is tied in with self-worth, because you actually start to, it chips away at who you are and who you feel you are in the world and what you're giving. So
Yeah.
it really starts to attack the self.
Yeah.
So I'm not enough. So going back to what I said before, so when I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, it was like, I'm not having that diagnosis. I literally said to the doctor, I don't want you to write that on my medical records.
Right. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so I didn't want the label. It's like, I am not having this label. And I fought it and I fought it. And it was actually only when I gave into it and then leaned into it and embraced it that things actually started to change. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, let's just see how this goes. If I listen to my body and if I'm tired, I listen to it. Maybe I do
Yeah.
that. And that was the game changer. That was the unlock. It was listening to my body when it was tired. It
Yeah.
was honoring the fact that I am an introvert, and I wasn't honoring all those really natural tendencies and who I was.
Yeah.
And
It,
so when I started to do that and just factor in the time to rest, going back to the other thing that we said right back at the start, that's what started to transform everything.
yeah. Rest is so powerful, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
I always say the body takes care of itself when you give it the right environment.
Yeah.
It's a it's a regenerating or
Mm,
self-organizing blob of
mm,
biology, your body is. And when you give it the right environment, the right temperature, the right food, the right attitude, it will just sort itself out. You won't need to get involved. It's like this whole
mm,
thing, you are not broken. Your body is telling you something, and your body in that chronic fatigue phase was telling
mm.
you, girl, you just got to rest. You just got to listen to me,
Yeah.
and then when you do, you adapt. But what came out for me there was the key phrase that popped into my head was, you started treating yourself with compassion,
Mm,
self-compassion.
yeah.
And I mean, that is probably another podcast episode, how
I think
compassion
so.
plays a role in behavior change.
Yeah.
Um, Definitely
Compassion
food
and
for thought.
acceptance. Yeah. And the compassion, you're right, comes from, again, this isn't without judgment of my parents, because I always say parents usually always just did the best they could with what
Absolutely.
they had. But my mum never had compassion for herself with the same cycle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that was replaying for me. And actually, I don't have children, but if there are people listening with children that relate to what I've said, you telling your children what to do to show them how to, like, so in other words, if you're a parent and you're saying, you should do this to take care of yourself, and you should slow down, and you should speak to yourself nicely. But if you're not doing it yourself,
Yeah.
children will actually they'll be more inclined to do what you do, not listen to what you say.
Right. They
So
model the behavior, not the
model,
words.
exactly.
Mm.
So, I would be mindful now, I think, if I had children, that I would be trying to model that and not just tell them what to do to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
me taking care of myself is compassionate, and it's also teaching them to have compassion for themselves and take care of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's so powerful. Then you don't even really need to use words. I think you
Mm.
can just talk about other things. If you're if you're naturally just drinking the water, doing the exercise,
Yeah.
resting, yeah, journaling, doing all the things, and the child will be curious and they will come to you, Mummy, what are
Yeah.
you doing? Like, I want to do some of that or
Yeah,
whatever.
they model as it's modeling and it's mimicking, and they're more inclined to do that. And I would just actually say it's not just if you have children, because actually everyone can learn something from that. Because when we as adults see other people, like our peers, do that and really own that and own their self-care, and that's inspiring.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, you've got real you're powerful, you've got autonomy over your own life, you choose, and that's really inspiring to see someone do that. So I think it's not just if you have kids, it's maybe it's a partner can learn to take care of themselves better if they see you doing it,
Yeah.
or a friend. It's like permission to.
Yeah, yeah. I
Well,
call it
another.
entrainment. You entrain just by being close to someone or just by
Mm,
observing someone doing that behavior, you become entrained by that, just through
mm,
osmosis, whatever medium it's traveling through. It definitely does travel. We learn through osmosis. What a
mm.
powerful conversation.
I know, Sally, we could go on and on as usual, but we shan't. I think we're going to end it there. Thank you for such an amazing conversation. Shared quite
Yeah.
a lot of personal stuff in that one, but I hope people have taken value from it, and maybe just reflecting on what they can do to bring more self-care into their own
Mm.
lives, and know that we all, it's a journey for all of us. We're all finding our way, and it's very,
Yeah.
very individual to each of us as well. So what we're sharing works for us, but it's about everyone finding, what works for them and what that looks and feels like for them as a person.
Yeah, and your sense into those moments of where something is unlocked for you that makes sense to you, that lands for you, resonates for you, as to what helps you to move forward into the next level of self-care for you. And as you said, Serena, it's so individual, but it's so
Mm,
foundational to changing any kind of behavior. It really is. Like, without self-care, I think behavior change is built on very loose and shaky foundation. So this, for me, is always the thing that has to come first.
yeah, it's a key component. Again, something that most people don't think about, but it's, yeah, definitely important.
Cool. Can't wait for the next conversation.
Yeah, can't wait. I'll see you in the next one.
All right,
See you.
lovely.
Bye.
Bye. Hi,
Oh,
Serena.
no, I'm going to say it this time.
Okay, go on.
Hello, Sally Garozzo. How are you on this fine day? Oh, frozen.
Yeah, try again.